I'm grabbing some tea because I've got a lot to share, so grab a drink and listen in. Welcome back to 5 Acres Honey Farm. I'm Tara Lynn. Today's video is about my experience getting my permaculture design certificate a little less than a year ago. And I got my certificate through Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Course. Around this time last year, late November, I was researching different permaculture programs, and I have been personally obsessed with permaculture for the past few years after I discovered it through a book about permaculture at a used bookstore here in my little town of Pittsboro, North Carolina. And after reading that book, which I have since dog-eared almost every page and underlined and got so many ideas for what to do around our yard, I not only was applying permaculture to our property and my first ventures into gardening, but I was also starting to apply permaculture just to our life in general, which I could do a whole separate video about. But this video is about why I chose the Oregon State University permaculture program and also what I liked about it. And I will share a few things that I did not particularly care for, nothing totally against the program or anything, but it's just what would have worked a little bit better for me personally in the style that I like to learn. One of the things that I was definitely looking for in a permaculture design program is that I did not want a self-guided course. I didn't feel that I would have, with all the different projects that I manage, which I know I just share, kind of a few little looks into beekeeping and gardening, and the quails and the chicken here. But I have so many different hobbies and interests, and my friends joke that my hobby is having hobbies. Like seriously, like I am taking up fly fishing next, and I paint and play piano and play guitar, and the list just keeps going on and on. Those areas where my energy is devoted change seasonally, and I knew that I didn't want something that was self-guided. I wanted something that had a specific start date and a specific end date so that I knew when that obligation, for lack of a better word, because it is, it's fun and it's learning and about stuff that I love, but it's still a commitment that I want to see through, and I wanted to make sure that it had a finite time associated with it, because there is so much demanding our attention, not just our hobbies, but also family matters of illness and deaths in the family in the past 2 years that just kind of keeps continuing. So that was one of the things, like as I Googled all different programs, those were immediately removed from consideration for me. The other option for getting your permaculture design certificate is to go to a multi-day or week-long or even a little bit longer in-person kind of intensive course. And of course, with COVID, a lot of those opportunities were not available. And I did see a potential opportunity that was scheduled for last summer with a very renowned permaculture figure, where I could go spend a week, and it was only a state away. And this is someone international that, it was quite a rare opportunity to have something where I could actually drive to take a course with. But knowing that it was in the middle of summer and could not foresee that we would have a death that very week, in a death in the family that week. But I knew that summer is such a demanding time with the bees and with the garden that I didn't want to have that kind of conflict. So I decided not to do an in-person course because of that variability, and also the uncertainty of if it was going to be canceled, if there was going to be like another spike in COVID cases, and that was going to perhaps prevent me from getting the certificate. I started then looking for courses that were going to be in a bit of the slow season. I really love, in the past few years, as I got into gardening, really embracing the seasonal lifestyle changes, and I love hibernating in the winter and having that time of reflection, a time for education and restoration. I started looking for classes that were available through the winter months, and I was going to rule out anything that was online in the peak growing and more demanding beekeeping season. And then I found the Oregon State University program, and I saw they offer it multiple times per year, and that they had a session coming up that ran from January to March, which to me is like perfect because I didn't want to have any of the holiday demands getting in the way of courses. And it was, and knowing like here in the central Piedmont area of North Carolina, January and February are the coldest months. I definitely was on board for having the course then because I knew I would be indoors more and love to keep busy. So the other benefit of the class ending in March is that by then I generally have most of my transplants out in the garden, and by March is really swarm season here, even sometimes February in our region. So I knew that the bees were going to be way more demanding. I was going to have to be checking them more often, and that is weather dependent. So there was a lot of kind of variability with how I would be able to spend my time. So knowing that the course would wrap up in March was perfect timing. Another thing that I really liked about the program, and this is something I did not learn until I was actually in the program, and I realized it in the thick of it, and it was even more pronounced once I finished the whole class, is that I would never have made such a detailed site plan if I would have worked on my own. And perhaps it's not right to speak in absolutes like that, and maybe I could have made something as detailed or even more detailed over a much longer time. But in that particular time frame, if I was working by myself and just self-educating with books and videos, I would not have personally taken the direction of making something so detailed. And to, have a, this is over 100-page PowerPoint presentation about our property, which I love so much, that I have elevation maps, that I have, soil, that I was able to analyze the soil here, researching the precipitation history in this area, wind direction. I mean, looking at how long the growing season is, frost dates, rainfall, those are pretty standard things. I would not have thought to look at wind direction. And that's just, it wouldn't have crossed my mind. And to really take the time to consider the potential of natural disasters in our area. I've only been here through tropical storms, and I haven't experienced like a full-scale hurricane in the area, but thinking of how can we make our property resilient to storm damage, and what's the potential for flooding in the area, or wildfires, which is much more a concern for those on the West Coast, but how can we manage our property so that if that becomes our climate here, we're in a good position for that, while at the same time being able to grow more food, for ourselves, but also more forage for the native pollinators and the honeybees. The other thing I really like about having such a detailed site plan was that it really got me thinking about our property in zones. And if you're familiar with permaculture, you understand that, your primary zones that you're using the most are, your first and second, and it kind of goes out to like zones 5 and perhaps zone 6 in some ways, where those are areas of your site where you're not visiting as much, that you might leave for wildlife. And zone 6 is much more about like the community in general. And I learned through the class that there's even a zone 0, which is yourself and, and how you're caring for yourself. So that, is a really great lesson in really thinking about the paths and how I'm spending time around our property and how I'm positioning things so that what can be the most effective way, both in the topography of the land and where runoff is, and direction of the sun during the different seasons, but also like how I'm going to be using that space. So having that in mind as the class progressed, like figuring out what systems do I want to put in place and what do I want to be adding to the property or removing from the property, how will those zones change over time? So putting in like proposed zones was really helpful in seeing maybe I shouldn't put things where I originally thought I should put them. It actually might make a lot more sense, just from an energy perspective in some cases, and some from a growing perspective. to have things in different locations. The other thing I liked about making such a detailed plan was that during the last week, or perhaps the second to last week, I think it was right at the tail end of the course, we also created a budget and like a year-long plan of like what we're going to put in place. So I truly was determined to put all the things that I listed in place. It was very attainable. The budget worked for me. However, like I mentioned, we had illnesses and deaths in the family, and so that's pretty much been, thrown out of the water there. And I haven't really revisited it to see if it's going to be something that will be feasible next year. It's still a little gray, like what time commitments I'll have available in the next year. Another thing that I really liked about the Oregon State Permaculture program was that it still, even though it was virtual, it allowed the opportunity to learn from others in the class. Having that peer discussion, even though it was just in a forum and comments on your assignments for the week, I learned so much from others. And I do miss, the opportunities to be in a classroom where you have that organic discussion and you kind of go off on tangents and learn about, a lot of different things you weren't expecting. But I feel like I still had that with the way that the forum was structured and the energy of the others taking the course. And what was really helpful was that, totally unplanned, there were several other students in the course who were in North Carolina. So I had really good examples of what others were doing in my zone and in my climate and region. And a lot were here in the Southeast. So it was good to see, how folks were managing their property in a little bit more warmer climates, somewhere in Virginia. So some neighboring states where it's, just got a little bit of a different, but very close to what I'm used to here. But there's also students who are international, who are in tropical areas and, have, kind of desert-like conditions, and like what they, at such a severe scale compared to, what I have to work with, and to see their creativity and ingenuity and how they really need to drive things in a much more accelerated direction. And it's interesting to see that, because I could just apply like small practices that are similar if I need to kind of, move things in a different way here on our property. And there were some things that I would not have considered even, after, and I mean, not to pat myself on the back, but I feel like I had, up until taking the class, done a really great job at self-education and just really consumed book after book after book, tons of videos about permaculture and different practices of sustainability. But I had never considered growing our own fuel for our wood stove to heat our house. And we have the property to do it. We have free trees. I mean, there are seedlings all over that I could recite or manage the land in the forest in a way to allow them to grow in place. And that's something that we may not be able to harvest next year, but 6-7 years from now, like as those trees mature and I have more areas around the property being managed that way, we can have that succession growth and harvest to help fuel our house and not have to rely on, purchasing firewood from elsewhere or waiting for a tree to fall and doing that instead. I also had kind of ruled out some things for our property that I didn't think were feasible. For example, we redid our the roof on the quail run a few years ago, before I was even interested in gardening and everything, and we did an asphalt roof and it had previously been a metal roof. And I feel like we lost an opportunity where I could have put a gutter system up there and had the chickens self-contained with their own rainwater catchment system. But with the asphalt roof, I don't want them drinking water that's been running off of all that asphalt and the chemicals in these shingles. So I just figured that's something that's just not going to happen. And maybe when the roof is replaced in many years, we'll do something about it then. But learning from other students that there are stainless steel water catchment systems where you can put carbon filters in to remove those impurities, now it's something that I am considering adding. probably not in the next year or two. So it's definitely something that is attainable. The other thing that doing the site plan and learning from others in the class is that I feel really compelled to apply permaculture to like every corner of our property to make sure everything is working as efficiently as it can. But what I really liked about learning about like zone 5, where that might mainly be preserved for wildlife, is that that's good. Like just section off some areas where you're not gonna interfere and allow that natural succession to take place. And that's a good thing because that attracts the wildlife, it gives them their habitat, and that makes me feel a lot more comfortable in especially like some other areas of our property, like rewilding them and bringing them back into that cycle of succession and creating more habitat and forage naturally for the native species. One of the other things that I learned from others in the class, I had put up a high tunnel earlier this year. So this is now I'm going into my first fall and my first winter with the high tunnel. So it went up right near the tail end of the permaculture class. But there was someone else, I think it was one of the instructors who had, and actually there might have been multiple people now that I'm thinking of the videos that I watched, where they had a pond in their high tunnel. And then I've also now visited some others locally who have high tunnels and greenhouses, and they have huge water tanks in there to help keep things warm. So that's something I hadn't considered when I put up the high tunnels. So now it's like, oh, that would have been really great to consider in advance because I may have situated things a little differently. Or, now I'm thinking of like, how can I get a rain catchment system on the high tunnel to maybe somehow funnel not just the irrigation, but maybe funnel into something, whether it's a pond or some kind of aquaculture feature in the high tunnel itself. Another thing, I feel like it's just like, I didn't number this list of everything that I really loved about the class because there are so many of them, and I feel like as I go through what I liked about the class, I'm thinking of more and more things, so this list could just kind of go on. But the main instructor who we really, you're just watching videos, so you don't get any kind of like real-time interaction with, but Andrew Millison is kind of behind the program at Oregon State, and he has phenomenal videos, phenomenal, and these videos are all available to the public, so you don't need to be a student to see them for the course. But he's also done at least one documentary, about water in India that is so inspiring and incredible. Like, I can't say enough great things. Like, it's just being exposed to his work. He also has a podcast. I don't think there are too many newer episodes, but I've listened to, the older ones, and there's always some gold nuggets to learn from what he's putting out there. And something that kind of happened fairly organically is that, I'm really looking at permaculture in a way, to make, the gardening spaces more productive and sustainable, and, creating that, really nutrient-dense food and habitat, and all of that kind of all of the synchronicity of all of the different systems, working together. But what I didn't really envision happening, but which really, evolved a lot this year, is that now I'm educating other beekeepers about applying permaculture in their apiary. So I spoke to a few beekeeping clubs this summer, and it is something that people are really hungry for because, most permaculture principles mean you're working less because you're putting smarter systems in place. And, you can be doing edible landscaping, so it's something you benefit from, but that's also forage for the pollinators. And there's ways of, setting up your apiary to, feed the bees and provide water while, working a little bit more in harmony with the native landscape. So that's been really fun for me because then I get to kind of nerd out a little bit more on permaculture, but also, help motivate other beekeepers to apply those practices too. All right, so just a few things that I didn't really care for about the program, and I am going to preface each one because some of them are, you know, it's truly nobody's fault. And I'll get the first one out of the way. It's no one's fault because we really have our hands tied living in a semi-rural, fairly rural area. Is we have had DSL internet for the last 7 years, really horribly slow speeds. You know, it's not even strong enough for me to be on Zoom calls, and going through the pandemic was really challenging because I'd have to call into Zoom conferences to have audio and then be really slow on video. Screen sharing was really painful. So taking an online course with video is a real struggle. So a lot of the videos I watched on my cell phone, we have great cell service here, so that's like a plus. And I used my hotspot on my phone for taking the class. So the struggle there was that I really like to reserve my hotspot for the workday if our internet fails, or if I am doing an important presentation and I need to be in real time and screen sharing, then I'm going to use my hotspot, and I only have a certain amount of data per month for that before the speeds get throttled. So I didn't want the extra expense of like increasing the hotspot data and all of that. So, you know, it was just trying to work really, really fast with the hotspot. And so there was like this level of urgency, a lot, like getting the assignments complete and hoping that I would have enough data left for the workday. So that was a struggle, and that's, you know, fortunately, like right at the end of the class, we got real internet offered to our community for the first time. So I have like joined, you know, society at this point. So I have much better internet now. It's not great, but it's much better. So another thing that that I didn't really care for is that, you know, there are videos to watch every week, and there's an assignment to complete every week, and the course instructors provide a PowerPoint template that you can use if you want, or you can create your own. And I decided to use the template because I thought that would kind of expedite things. And it just required, and I am a pro at PowerPoint, it just required a ton of time to reformat to how it would need to fit what I was doing. So there were a lot of, like, it wasn't just you could just start using a text box. Like, you're gonna start using the text box, and you have to change that it's not highlighted and change the font color and the sizing, and it was just, I don't think it would have been easier to start from scratch, but it was essentially like starting from scratch because of how much time it was taking to reformat. And there's a lot of information on like the sides of the slides that when you're submitting your presentation in for your assignment in for the week, you don't need there. So then you're going through and deleting all that extra stuff. There was definitely a sentiment from other students who were not as tech savvy and who did not know PowerPoint, and I really felt bad for them because, like, and you do have the option of doing everything analog. Like, you could sketch it out on paper and take a picture of it and upload it. You could do that, and at times I considered doing it because our internet was so horrible, and also maybe it was going to take less time. But honestly, to go to that effort and then to have a good resource to look back on, I wanted something digital that I could use and revise over time. So that was a little challenging with that. But there are also like some other, landscaping design programs out there, and they do recommend some. So, you're free to use what you need to get your assignment complete for the week. So I had trouble using the PowerPoint template. It just felt really clunky, and it took a lot more time than I thought. Like I seriously spent 20 to 30 hours a week preparing my assignment, and that was not including watching the videos. Like the videos, I just I stopped watching the videos after the first few weeks of class because that wasn't going to get me the grade. The grade was the assignment. So I would just do whatever I needed to get the points for the slides, and I figured I'll watch the videos later, which was a bit disappointing. I mean, I watched some videos because it was really convenient for me. I work out every morning, so I can watch at least an hour of videos every morning during the week. But as far as like getting the assignment done, it was really clunky, and it was compounded by our really slow internet here, so that took a lot more time too. And the only other thing that I was disappointed about was that by the time class ended, there was a note that went out to the students that explained, kind of apologizing for the PowerPoint and for all of the work that was involved. Like, it was a huge time commitment. And they shared that this was the first time they used that template, and they didn't realize how much work they were really expecting of us. And that they decided that all that work, that they were going to create a pro certification of the Permaculture Design Course, and that we should feel good that we did it all, but we're not getting that pro certification. That was disappointing. I mean, I worked so hard. I'm sure if I reached out and, asked about it, I feel like there could be some kind of concession made, but I'm not seeking to do this on that professional level, so it's not something that I'm going to pursue. But it was disappointing to hear that they acknowledged how much work that was and that I did that work, but that, if I wanted to, I could take the course again. And I don't want to go through the expense of taking it again and then to get that extra pro certification, because I am doing this, just because I'm personally interested in it, and not for, kind of commercial needs. So overall, like as you can kind of hear, like there's so much that I loved about the course, and it really fit for what I needed. And there were just those few minor things that that I didn't care for as much about the class. Courses change a lot over time and they evolve, so they were pretty unique to the time that I took it. And just to give some context, because I know, folks may be watching this, a long time from now, but I took the course January through March of 2021. Course popularity was fueled greatly by COVID and a lot of people becoming interested in this topic. So from my understanding, like the demand has just continued to grow for their future classes. So I'm sure it'll be changing over time and evolving, and all those little kinks are probably getting worked out and stuff too. So it's going to be even more fun and educational too. So what I've shared may not even apply, but at least all the goodness and like why I was attracted to the program, and all the bonuses of taking it, hopefully that's helpful to you. And I'd love to hear if you are planning to take a permaculture design course, or if you've already taken one, what your experience is like, what you're hoping for or expecting, or what you're looking for in that kind of program. And I'd love for you to share in the comments. And I, plan to continue providing, content related to permaculture in the apiaries, but also in the garden too. So please subscribe, like, and all that jazz. And I'll see you next time.